Okay, let's be honest. Some of you were rolling your eyes despite that mic drop quality recitation. Oh my God. Most people skim right past these genealogies without a second thought. A long list of so and so begat so and so isn't exactly gripping, yet hidden in this roll call of ancestors is a story brimming with scandal, grace, and a divine plot twist. If the Bible had a tabloid section, Jesus's family would be front page news, complete with scandalous headlines, dramatic twists, and unexpected heroes that would make even the juiciest gossip column jealous. Yet, this isn't just drama for drama's sake. Matthew is making a profound theological and political claim. In the first century world, genealogies were not primarily about precision, but about establishing honor. They shaped identity, reinforced social standing, and legitimized authority. By arranging Jesus's genealogy into these three structured sections of 14 generations, Matthew signals that Jesus is not just another historical figure, but the culmination of Israel's story, fulfilling God's covenantal promises. Our Jewish forebears understood from the prophets that God had promised to renew all of creation in the age to come, was one of the ways they described it. It was also known as the Messianic age, or as Jesus preferred, the kingdom of God. We've just spent some time thinking about that in the Lord's Prayer series. Matthew's use of the word Genesis, which is what it is in Greek, in that first line for this genealogy, signals to his audience that a new creation story, a renewal of God's creation as God had promised, is underway in Jesus the Christ. Now, it's natural to highlight the best parts of our family history and keep the embarrassing details tucked away, right? As Tom observed in the tree image. That was so great, Tom. But Matthew does the opposite. He puts the complicated, messy, and even scandalous figures of Jesus's ancestry right in the spotlight. Have you ever done this? Introduced your family with a careful edit? Oh, yeah, my great uncle was a famous artist, and then casually ignored the cousin who made the news for all the wrong reasons, or the aunt whose holiday newspaper reads like a manifesto for conspiracy theories. At my house, we always boasted about our connection to Babe Ruth, but conveniently skipped over the scandal of my grandmother's alcoholism and adultery. Yet Matthew leans in hard to the chaos. He highlights the messy ancestors of Jesus, people that most kings would erase from the records. And yet Jesus's lineage is proudly filled with outsiders, scandal, and unlikely heroes. Why? Because God's grace doesn't edit people out. It pulls them in. And think about it. If we were designing a royal lineage for the Son of God, we'd probably make it look pristine and spotless, full of powerful figures. And instead, Matthew flips the switch, shows us a family tree that looks more like a dysfunctional holiday dinner than a carefully curated list of noble bloodlines. This is not a picture of an unblemished dynasty, but of a God who works through real flawed people, a genealogy of redemption, a tapestry woven together by broken threads that God, in divine creativity, reweaves into something beautiful. It's as if Matthew is saying, if you think your past disqualifies you from God's plan, think again. So let's provide a little context, and then we'll meet some of these unlikely VIPs in Jesus's family. This genealogy is not just a list of names. It's a bold declaration about who Jesus is and what kind of kingdom he brings. These first century audiences would have immediately recognized the honor that Matthew ascribes to Jesus by linking him to Abraham and David. But beyond establishing Jesus's legitimacy, this genealogy does something shocking. It challenges expectations about who belongs in God's unfolding story. Back then, Genealogies weren't just for family records, they were status symbols, reinforcing the social order, legitimizing rulers, and affirming noble bloodlines. So Matthew is doing something really revolutionary. His genealogy doesn't follow a straight line of kings and priests, but instead includes these outsiders and women and those with questionable pasts. It would have been startling to the first century audience who expected genealogies to highlight only the most honorable male ancestors. Instead, Matthew deliberately highlights these dishonored ones: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba, all who broke social norms and yet became central to God's unfolding story. These women's stories should have disqualified them by society's standards, yet in Matthew's telling, their inclusion is intentional. It foreshadows the kind of Messiah that Jesus will be, one who blesses all people, welcomes outsiders, and redefines what is honorable. So let's take a look at some of the star players in Jesus's genealogy. Tamar, we meet in Genesis 38. She's widowed, abandoned, and denied justice by her own family. She took an audacious step to outsmart a corrupt patriarchal system so that she could secure her future. When her father-in-law, Judah, refused to fulfill his legal obligation to provide for her, she disguised herself and tricked him into restoring her rights. Though society might have condemned her, God did not. She was honored as an ancestor of the Messiah, proving that God's justice often looks different from human judgment. Rahab, we meet in Joshua chapter 2. A Canaanite woman with a risky profession, Rahab lived in Jericho and provided refuge to Israelite spies. Recognizing the power of Israel's God, she bravely negotiated for her family's survival, demonstrating faith that led to her becoming a part of this lineage of the Messiah. So, despite her outsider status, she was honored for her courage and her trust in God's plan. Ruth, you remember, we learned a lot about Ruth this last year when Tom preached about it. She was a Moabite, meaning a total outsider to Israel, and yet she chose faithfulness over comfort. After losing her husband, Ruth refused to abandon her mother-in-law, Naomi, declaring, "Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." She courageously journeyed to Bethlehem, working tirelessly to provide for Naomi, and she found redemption in Boaz, ultimately becoming a great-grandmother to King David. Her story is one of radical loyalty, perseverance, and the unexpected ways that God welcomes outsiders into God's plan. And finally, Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. Matthew doesn't even mention David here, probably because, well, yikes. Her story is one of power, betrayal, and ultimate redemption. Taken. Let me say that again. Taken by King David under dubious circumstances, she endured the loss of her husband and the consequences of David's sin. Yet, despite the turmoil, Bathsheba became the mother of Solomon and played a key role in securing his reign, proving that God can bring restoration even from the most broken situations. So Tamar was disqualified because she used deception to claim her rights in a system that was stacked against her. Rahab was disqualified because her past occupation and foreign status made her an unlikely candidate for honor. Ruth was disqualified because, as a Moabite, she was from a people often cast aside by Israel. And Bathsheba disqualified because she was caught up in the wake of power abuse and scandal. But God made a way when there was no way. God rewrote the script, turning their perceived flaws into instruments of a divine plan for redemption, proving that no past mistake, no social label, and no outsider status is beyond the reach of God's amazing grace. Instead of being erased from history, disqualified, they became integral to the greatest redemption story ever told, the one that culminates in Jesus, the ultimate fulfillment of God's promise. Matthew's genealogy isn't just a list of names, it's a bold declaration that God's renewal is breaking into history. The very first words in Greek, the book of the Genesis of Jesus the Christ, immediately echo the story of creation itself. It's not just a historical record, it's a new Genesis, the dawn of something entirely new. By calling Jesus the son of David and the son of Abraham, Matthew does more than affirm his royal lineage. He's proclaiming that Jesus is the long-awaited messianic king, but a different king, one who won't rule through conquest like David, but through peace, justice, and radical inclusion. The presence of these four Gentile women in this genealogy further drives this point home. In a world where ancestry meant legitimacy, their inclusion is nothing short of revolutionary. It's a theological statement. God's kingdom isn't just for the privileged, it's for the overlooked, the excluded, and the ones bold enough to step into God's grace. Matthew's not just recording history, he's setting the stage for the entire gospel. Jesus will upend religious and political power, redefine who belongs in God's family, and extend salvation beyond every boundary. It's not just a record, friends. It's a challenge. It forces us to ask, who do we consider honorable? Who do we deem worthy? How do we understand God's renewal of the world? Just like a tabloid exposes hidden truths, this genealogy pulls back the curtain on who God chooses to work through. The real front page news isn't about wealth, power, or status. It's about God's relentless grace rewriting every story, including ours. Imagine if the genealogy were a Netflix series. You'd have drama, deception, unexpected plot twists, and redemption arcs that would rival the Game of Thrones. But that's exactly the point. God doesn't just use perfect people. God works through messy, broken, unexpected ones like you and like me. This family tree is not about good genetics or having the right last name. It's about grace. And dude, if Jesus comes from a family that includes scandal, pain, and outsiders, what does that tell us? It says that there's room for all of us in God's story. So the final lesson that we have from these grandmothers of the Messiah has to do with the story that we will write. Did you know that there are only 3 species, and these are the big brain ones, that have evolved to a condition of menopause? So what does that have to do with this genealogy? Well, in humans, elephants, and killer whales, childbirth is dangerous. In fact, you can die from it. Evolutionary biology suggests that menopause evolved precisely so that grandmothers could stay alive for another 25 years or so, significantly more than grandfathers, by the way, and dedicate themselves to teaching and guiding their descendants rather than bearing more children. The wisdom of grandmothers is not just sentimental, it's an essential part of human flourishing. Our ancestors play a critical role in passing down knowledge and ensuring the survival of future generations. These ancestors play a critical role in passing down values, morals, and the stories of our faith. In that way, it is the grandmothers who ensure the survival of God's promises. So the stories that we pass on matter. This genealogy of Jesus's with Tamar and Rahab and Ruth and Bathsheba, these women suffered and took risks and fought for their family. They're the ancestors of our faith, and their legacy leads us right to Jesus. So the question before us this morning is, what story will we write? And what values, morality, wisdom, and faith are we passing on? Explicitly in our Sunday school and in formation and in church and in our homes? What are the explicit teaching that we're offering up? And what's implicit in our work to bring the kingdom of God here into our homes and our communities? How are we being sanctuary for those with none? How are we making sure everyone has bread? How are we living with an attitude of gratitude? How are we forgiving as we have been forgiven? How are we making love and justice real? So perhaps this long genealogy that had your eyes glazing over 15 minutes ago, perhaps this is the heart of true diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not sanitizing history, but embracing its fullness, learning from its lessons, and ensuring that everyone belongs in the ever-expanding story of love. Just as Matthew's genealogy shattered expectations by including these outsiders, our call is to ensure that no one, no one, no one is excluded from the love, justice, and grace that defines God's kingdom. We are called to be the grandmothers of faith, passing on the wisdom of belonging, inclusion, and redemption to future generations. We are the next chapter. What will we pass down? I pray that it would be love and the correcting of everything that stands in the way of love. May it be so.